I'm Ranger Elissa, and the topic of this little glimpse is going to be wilderness. So we're going to look at a variety of aspects of wilderness, from our personal definitions of wilderness to legal definitions, and how those apply to managing Grand Canyon National Park and the National Wilderness Preservation System. Sound good? Cool. So when you hear the word wilderness, it's likely that a variety of sights, sounds, smells, sensations are conjured up, maybe. It is likely that everyone in this room, despite our varying experiences, we all have a wilderness story. We have a story of that moment. Maybe it was an aha moment, maybe it was an uh-oh moment, where things kind of came together. But typically those stories start something like, there was this time I was in the wilderness, and don't think too hard. Think for just a second, turn to someone sitting near to you, and complete that sentence with your story. There was this time when I was in the wilderness, and communicate. So this could go on for a while. I could ask you to consider that story and what it is that you value about that experience. And also, how was it that that experience has shaped your personal definition of wilderness and your relationship with wilderness? This is a glimpse, so we must move on. But if we had the time to hear every single one of your stories and your definitions of wilderness, although each one is no doubt unique, I think we'd probably also find some common threads in that. Common threads include those personal experiences in natural environments that are primarily free from the encumbrances of modern society. It can be the biophysical environments that are also free of human impact. And thirdly, I would say it's the symbolic meanings of wilderness as well. When it comes to symbolic meanings of wilderness, a man named Howard Zahniser, he said that to know the wilderness is to know a profound humility. To recognize one's littleness, to sense dependence and interdependence, indebtedness and responsibility. So who was Howard Zahniser? Howard Zahniser is often referred to as the father of the Wilderness Act. His relationship with nature began in his childhood, which was spent in the northwestern Pennsylvania in the Allegheny River region. As an adult, he left a very comfortable job with the federal government, the Fish and Wildlife Service, to take on an executive role with the Wilderness Society. Howard Zahniser, he realized that there was a need for permanent protection of our nation's undisturbed and undeveloped areas. While early proponents of wilderness, Aldo Leopold, Arthur Carhart, Robert Marshall, add those names to your vocabulary, they're not in it. Well, these guys were successful at getting wilderness designated on a local level administratively. Zahniser realized that locally administered wilderness was subject to damage, a number of threats, loss, complete loss based on changing administrations. So Zahniser felt that there was a need to have a common standard for wilderness management across the nation, and not only a common standard, but there was a need to make these wilderness areas designated by Congress. They needed a higher level of protection and designation. The road to the passage of the Wilderness Act was not an easy one. Zahniser composed the first draft of his wilderness bill in 1956. It would take 9 years, 65 rewrites, and 18 public hearings. But in August of 1964, all that work paid off when it came to voting, and it was a vote of 374-1. Almost unanimous. Can you imagine that happening today? Enough said. September 3rd, 1964, Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Wilderness Act into law. He signed that into law. Unfortunately, it was 4 months after Howard Sonneiser had passed away. But this would be the first time that a country defined and designated wilderness by law, okay? Hugely significant. The Wilderness Act has proven to be one of our most successful environmental laws. It's stood strong for over 50 years without significant amendment. And the Wilderness Act serves as our guiding force for managing wilderness. When the law was signed, it created the National Wilderness Preservation System. So when that law was signed, 9.1 million acres of federal land became the starting point for this National Wilderness Preservation System. Today, that system has grown significantly. We're now over 109 million acres of federally designated wilderness. That's 765 wilderness areas in 44 states. Wilderness, and we call this kind of capital W wilderness. You know, we often call our personal definitions of wilderness little w wilderness, but big designated wilderness is managed by all 4 federal land management agencies: Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, and the National Park Service, right? So the National Park Service, we manage the largest portion of the wilderness preservation system, 55%, over 44 million acres in 61 areas. Each agency has its own unique mission, but each agency has also found a way to preserve and protect wilderness in accordance with that mission. How does an agency like the National Park Service manage wilderness? It seems like a paradox, right? Wilderness, free of control, management, control, right? Control of visitors, control of nature. So it can seem kind of crazy, but it has been realized. Originally, people thought if we designate wilderness, if Congress does that, it'll be protected. It'll be preserved and protected. But it has been revealed over time that both external and internal threats to wilderness are for real. And we need to think about those. So when it comes to managing wilderness, we look to Section 2C of the law, which defines wilderness character. What is wilderness? Section 2C of the law says wilderness should be untrammeled. That does not say trampled. Howard Sonneiser picked this word very specifically. If something is trammeled, it's shackled or it's hobbled. So if it is untrammeled, it is intentionally unmanipulated, right? We are not controlling predators. We are not doing fire suppression, stocking lakes with trout, you name it, right? Those are examples of trammeling. So wilderness should be untrammeled. It should be undeveloped. It's the second quality of wilderness character. That means there shouldn't be permanent improvements. Man is a visitor who does not remain. Wilderness should be natural. Indigenous species should be present in the wilderness, and ecological processes should be allowed to continue. Wilderness should provide opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined form of recreation. This is where we get our inspiration, and a lot of times. It's adventure, right? Mental, physical challenge, self-discovery, self-reliance through unmechanized, primitive recreation. The 5th category of wilderness character is this kind of thing that's called other features of value. So That can be a number of different things. The wilderness was set aside for many purposes. The Act says it's for the public purposes, not only of recreation, but of science, scenic, conservation, historical uses. Many different features and values exist. Sometimes it's really site-specific. Maybe it's just an object like this metate. But as we learned with talking with Jason and Lyle yesterday, wilderness can also protect entire cultural landscapes too. Maybe there are ecological significance, geological significance. There are many things. All of these characteristics, these 5 qualities of wilderness character, metaphorically speaking, it is like an orchestra, right? It is like an orchestra. It is comprised of numerous instrumental voices, and in combination, those voices achieve something much greater than the sum of their individual parts, right? So you can see that baton in the corner. That's your wilderness manager. And they are looking at all of those different features of wilderness character. They do not consider one more important than the other. They are all given equal balance, and they're constantly working and shifting and trying to preserve this idea of wilderness character. That drives how we manage wilderness, but wilderness character also drives the determination for suitability within the preservation system. Sorry, in 1964, when the Act was signed, the Secretary of the Interior was given 10 years. 10 years to look at all roadless areas of 5,000 acres or more and come back with a recommendation as to whether those lands are suitable or unsuitable for inclusion in the National Wilderness Preservation System. Based on what you know, what I just taught you about wilderness character, and based on your knowledge of Grand Canyon National Park, 1.2 million acres, if you were the Secretary of the Interior, how much of this park would you deem suitable for wilderness designation? So 1.1 million acres, or 94% of Grand Canyon National Park, has been deemed suitable for wilderness designation. Yeah, so 1.1 million out of 1.2 million. All but that does not include the South Rim developed areas, North Rim developed areas, the corridor. I repeat, it does not include the corridor trails and the road corridors, the land right along our roads. So all but about 30,000 acres of that 1.1 million acres are suitable for immediate designation. The other 30,000, there's some incompatible uses, but it could be eligible. So if the Secretary of the Interior was given 10 years, what year did Grand Canyon National Park receive its wilderness designation? You guys are so smart. Unfortunately, the Wilderness Act, it gave a deadline for when to make that recommendation. It did not give a deadline as to when legislative action had to be taken. 1969, Grand Canyon National Park begins a wilderness study. What happened in 1975? You learned this morning with Stephen Hurst. Yeah, the Enlargement Act. So we were given an extension. 1977, we submitted that final wilderness proposal. Action was suspended until the completion of a Colorado River Management Plan. That plan was completed in 1975. We quickly revised and resubmitted our final wilderness recommendation in 1980. And why have we not received congressionally designated wilderness? There's a hint right behind me. At Grand Canyon, the central factor has always been the highly political use of motorboats on the Colorado River. That's been the central factor. There are other factors with that 30,000 acres I told you about, including inholdings and boundaries and incompatible uses. But think about this. The Colorado River corridor is less than 1% of that proposed 1.1 million acres. Less than 1%. Yet, the Colorado River, even though it's managed under the Colorado River Management Plan, we cannot ignore it in the sense that it has an impact on our wilderness character and visitor experiences. What other management plans have an impact as well? Overflights management. Yeah, right? In 2011, in the spring, we started the revision and updating of our 1988 Backcountry Management Plan. So we're looking at the Backcountry Management Plan and how it relates to wilderness character, issues in the backcountry, and how that all fits in with the Wilderness Act. So do we have wilderness at Grand Canyon? A lot of people don't even like to ask that question because they're like, Yes, we have lots of it. We have our personal definitions, but the National Park Service, until legislative action and decisions have been taken on our wilderness recommendation, we are guided by a non-degradation policy that says we cannot degrade any resources that have wilderness character and that are eligible for wilderness designation. So that non-degradation policy needs to tie into those big management plans that we create, right? But who else does the non-degradation policy apply to? Every single one of us that spends time in Grand Canyon and that values the wilderness at this place, right? We know that even the highest level of protection, right? Wilderness protection is an even higher level than national park status. It's an extra level of protection. Even the highest level of protection can't take from those threats. There are a lot of threats, right? Internal threats, external threats, economic development, population growth, overuse, technology, fire suppression, disease, pollution, lack of awareness. That's overwhelming. It's easy to look at the sheer size of these issues, become overwhelmed, and maybe even become complacent. But we're also responsible for not degrading this resource. And there are things that each and every one of us can do to help preserve and protect wilderness. One, learn more about the wilderness preservation system. What's in your backyard? There's an entire book just on Arizona. Learn where your clients are coming from, right? Second, I would say, is teach and model leave no trace skills and ethics. Thank you. Yes, the skills piece of L&T, it's pretty tangible. It's pretty easy to teach, right? But how often do you spend time talking with your clients about wilderness ethics? Anybody? Someone once told me that your ethics are the choices that you make when you know no one else is watching. If that's the case, where does your wilderness ethic come from? Is it somehow connected, maybe, to that little story that you told the person sitting next to you at the beginning? Each and every one of us, I think, holds wilderness at such a high value that we've all chosen to dedicate a portion of our lives to wilderness, to teaching others and sharing Grand Canyon's wilderness. We're helping these people to write their own wilderness stories. Maybe their story will start something like, there was this time I was in the Grand Canyon. These stories are what will get passed on, and those stories are what will ensure an enduring resource of wilderness for future generations. Do not forget what Howard Saalnizer said, but think about it in terms of this place. To know the Grand Canyon is to know a profound humility. To recognize one's smallness, to sense dependence and interdependence, indebtedness, and responsibility. Thank you.